Hello, welcome back to the HypnoDivergence podcast. I am J. Robert Parker, joined by my peers and compatriots today, minus Renee and Aya. They are out today, attending to life. And before we get started today, I'd like to remind everyone to like and subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Anchor, whatever your preferred method may be. And if we'll mention it again at the end, if you want to reach out to us with any questions, you can reach out to us at our email at hypnodivergence@gmail.com. So, how is everyone doing? We've had some technical difficulties getting this episode started, but we are up and going now. So, take 4 or 5. I don't know what this has been, but anyway,
I'm well, and
how's everyone doing today? Present, good enough. We're joined today by 3 other people. We have, as usual, Jes and Callum and Molli Lou. So, Callum, Molli, say hello.
Present.
Well, present, counted for. Awesome. So, today we have an interesting topic. Today we have a topic that's kind of near and dear to all of us. And what we're going to be talking about today is neurodivergence. If it wasn't obvious by the podcast name that was something kind of close to us, then let it be obvious now. It's wordplay. So it's a very interesting topic. It's a very contentious topic at times, and for many good reasons. And I guess we should start this by defining what exactly is neurodivergence, and what, if anything, does being neurotypical mean? And Jes, you had found a very interesting definition that kind of surprised a lot of us. Can you go ahead and read that for the audience now, if you have it still pulled up?
Sure. So neurodivergence is an umbrella term now, and it was initially coined by sociologist Judy Singer, and it was specifically referring to people who have autism in the beginning. And now it has really broadened to include autism, ADHD, dyslexia, other learning differences, Tourette syndrome, synesthesia, Down syndrome, epilepsy, a number of chronic mental health illnesses such as bipolar disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, borderline personality disorder, and even anxiety and depression. So that really blew our minds, because if neurodivergence has been considered as the not norm, then we look and see that anxiety and depression are included under this umbrella, and how widespread those conditions are. Wow.
Yeah. That really kind of stunned me personally, seeing just how far that scope had gone. And really one of the things that we brought up as a question to that is, what does neurotypical even mean at that point? If everyone can fall under this umbrella, what does that mean? And the question has to come up: why are we talking about this besides our own personal interest in it? Well, it's important for everyone out there listening.
Why should I care, J. Rob?
Why should I care about
why
this?
Should I care?
Sell me on neurodivergence. It's because this
Sovereignty.
has been sovereignty. That's a lot of it, but it's this stigma that's existed. We don't talk about it. That autism is this thing that people should keep under wraps. It's a disorder. It's a disability. And I mean, I'll go ahead and throw the gauntlet on the table early. acknowledging the autistic tendencies in myself, and that was a part of my life, and not just acknowledging it, but accepting it, embracing it, becoming familiar with it, making friends with it, is something that has truly affected my life. And that's really what we're trying to do with this, is remove some of that stigma, remove
the unwinding.
That unwinding. And it's not saying that everyone listening right now is autistic, but a lot of people listening might be neurodivergent and might feel different for the fact, and might feel
I think an important piece of the conversation here is that there is a resonance to your being, and that your ideal resonance for you personally, which is to be experimented with and to be discovered essentially, or rediscovered by you, it is going to be best expressed through you. And that if you take the society's standards as your own, then you're not engaging in the cultivation of yourself. And so neurodivergence is a way of providing ourselves understanding and compassion.
Correct.
As well as acknowledging that some people are really different.
And different is okay, and different is good. And it is
that's
a part
the big
of
thing.
the
Different is good.
Tapestry of our humanity that doesn't need to be hidden
and that's
anymore.
What needs to be emphasized. It's not just okay.
It's important.
Yes, it's good. It's important. It's necessary to society. And
I feel like that, well, I was going to say, so my view on neurodivergence is honestly like, how many of us actually felt that meeting society's standards and norms was natural?
Or healthy.
Right. Or worked, it was... Who was born aligned with that naturally without having to give up any of their sovereignty or authenticity to be part of it, right? I feel like no one, but that's just me. And I also feel that, like, my diagnosis, whether you're diagnosed or not, and you align with that, right? All that did for me was give me the freedom and excuse to experiment and actually find my authenticity. Right? Like, I got to be weird because of my ADHD. I got to do the things and just use that, oh, well, I'm ADHD, it's fine. Before it was accepted, right? And lean into that. And that was a gift, I think.
And what's interesting is that that's the same mechanism as what is used to tell us to be the norm. It's the codification of standards. And so if we're if we really want standards that work for everybody, codification like into law, right? Like, this is the law of the land. This is how we do things here, right? Better line up with how people do things here. I think we've all been told that in some way or another. And that's the same action as what Molly's saying, as empowering her to embody her sovereignty, is I can be neurodivergent. I can be however I want. And I think part of the challenge with that is utilizing the model to pull yourself into your own true resonance and your own true sovereignty. And then but as you grow, allow that to shift and change and develop, because you're continually pulling yourself into health, into wellness, into the vibration of your whole being.
It's really
instead of fragmenting yourself into less.
Because labels and words are powerful, and they can be used for us or against us, is what I'm hearing Callum say.
Yes,
and
thank you.
My experience was that having a name to it gave me power to understand myself better too. But there is always that piece that not everybody else is going to see it that way, right? Like, that helped me internally, but then there's still the, like, explaining yourself to other people.
It's the difference. It's the difference between giving something a name to define it and giving something a label to adhere to. And
right, like
the fight to not
one of the things
let it box you in.
Exactly.
like,
and they talk about this
viewing it as a permission slip rather than a limitation.
There's this idea, and Gestalt theory is going to be something, for those of you unfamiliar, something we inevitably touch on. All of these strange modalities we have, it's going to be in a future episode where we kind of explain ourselves a little bit. But
modalities.
What's that? That basically, thanks for that. Modalities basically means the tools and lenses that we use to view our clients, the world around us, whatever have you. And Gestalt theory has a lot to do with the sense of self. And one of the things it says about labels is that they're kind of risky, because whenever you, for example, let's say you are clinically diagnosed depressed, you now have the label on you of you are depressed or you have anxiety. Well, there is a fine line between clarity and identifying that issue and understanding and identifying by that. And for a great deal, many people, well, you're depressed. That means you can never be anything but depressed because that is your label. That has become an identity. And that's where, when we talk about labels, it kind of gets a little tricky. And like Jess, those same labels have given me a lot of understanding for certain things in the past. But at the same time, simply just wearing that label like a badge, choosing to identify by those labels, isn't always a good thing.
Right. I think it's a tool, though, right?
Yes.
That I saw that label as a tool and an opportunity, right? Like, what can this label do for me, rather than what is wrong with me because I have the label, right? Like, how can I use this, right? So it's that positivity versus negativity bias. So I took the label of ADHD and I was like, cool. All right, what are the dopest things about this? And how can I use those as a inspiration and motivation to, like, live my goddamn best, happiest life? You know, and looking at all of the people throughout history that have been neurodivergent and done like the coolest things, the most innovative things that have brought our whole society forward technologically and socially and all of that, right?
Could you educate at least me on some of those things?
Okay, so for example, Tesla, Einstein, like people like that, big innovators. And there's some debate through, you know, historically speaking, through people that are so far long gone, but you can see tendencies that would make it make sense, right? So, and even now,
I'll
try not to do a podcast on Nikola Tesla right now.
Oh, by the way, happy birthday. Posthumously, today is Tesla's birthday as of this recording on the 10th.
Yo!
Yes. So,
of all the people I could have mentioned, I literally have a list of like 50 people.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday to you and your weird little bird.
So that's lovely that you say that, because Nikola Tesla was definitely clairaudient.
Oh, yeah.
He at one point said that his ear is as big as the universe.
He was also neurodivergent as hell. So one of the things I found, just out of curiosity, looking this up, I decided to look up the definition of neurotypical for our own edification for the audience. And this is very strange and merits some discussion, because this is the Oxford language definition, an example of neurotypical used in the sentence. So, neurotypical, adjective, not displaying or characterized by autistic or other neurologically atypical patterns of thought or behavior. It's just not being anything else.
Weird.
It gets weirder, because here is it used in a sentence. Neurotypical individuals often assume that their experience of the world is either the only one or the only correct one. And
so it's fear-based.
That's on
neurotypical, you said.
Neurotypical. That is the definition of neurotypical. That it is an inability to see beyond your own personal experience.
Okay. I love viewing neurotypical as the symptoms. I don't know if anybody else has ever done this, where you list off all the symptoms of
Are we doing this?
It'll be fine.
And it's like
I love this.
rigid in thinking, like in a certain way, right? Like, inability to innovate past a certain extent of society's expectations.
Oh,
like
God. Okay,
things like that.
While you're talking, I'm going to try to find this meme.
Doesn't feel a need to use stimuli from outside of them to make them comfortable for some reason, or they refuse to use stimuli. Like me, who constantly is doing this, that I'm sure will be picked up at some point.
Sometimes I wonder if it's a limitation in senses. So many people who are neurodivergent have such a more expanded sensory experience.
Sometimes overwhelmingly so.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that needs to be acknowledged here too in this discussion, is that not everyone experiences their neurodivergence in a positive way, or at least not all of it in a positive way, and that there are real true challenges that come along with a lot of these differences, conditions, however you want to put it, experiences that need to be acknowledged. And I think there is so much room
and talked about
to provide a more open-minded help with those individual struggles that come from different experiences on neurodivergent spectrums, and help in a way that isn't within the frame of putting someone in a neurotypical box, but actually just like getting to the root of a specific struggle by asking the person who's experiencing it, right, what is it that you want
and the big thing
help with? What is it that you want to feel instead? How is it that you want to experience
acknowledgement
a certain
of what's going
versus
on,
how you are experiencing it? And when we start to have an openness to those discussions and to helping people in where they're at, and not trying to make them anything other than where they are at, then it's like, how can we help you live the highest expression of this experience you have, of this aspect of your neurology? How can we help you live at the highest expression of that versus the struggle that you're in? Right.
Or trying to conform to.
And so much of it comes down to communication.
Well, and I think the proof of that working is like this group that we have going, right? Because like we'll say things like, I just need to, like, I'm sorry, I can't process this right now. I just need to go like cocoon. Or like one of the biggest conversations we've been having lately is about the different stimuli and how, like, so I'm ADHD and my husband is autistic and ADHD, and he is a loud stimmer, right? Like, so he's like very loud and I can be sensitive to noise. So how we coexist, and like in this group itself, we have those conversations, right? Because some of us have one, like that's the spectrum of sensory experience, right? So some of us have certain sensitivities that other people have cravings of, and how we can be respectful, because there are times where I'm like, to my husband, I need you to, like, I don't know, either take it outside or tone it down, because like I want,
or learning how to
like,
remove yourself
snappy
from
and
a stimulus, and it and communicate
or I need
what you're doing also,
right?
because the awareness comes from our ability to communicate it. And the more we are openly communicating our experiences and where we're coming from and why we're doing what we're doing, the more accepting everyone, and it gives other people freedom to do the same.
Right. And
if you're not sure what those behaviors are, ask your partner.
Where are you?
Yeah.
Where are you right now? Right.
Yeah.
That's why that question's so important.
Right.
Where are you right
Well, what happens
right?
when you don't communicate it, right? For me, I mean, it looks different for all of us. If I don't communicate that I'm overloaded, then I get irritable. I get irritable as fuck. Like, I get snippy and I just like shut down, and I can't come from an intentional place until I can lower my like sensitivity to stimuli.
100%.
So, I mean, if I don't communicate, it fucks with all my relationships.
Yeah. And
Absolutely. And it's become a major thing with mine because, like, when we go out, my partner is very attentive to, are you overstimulated? Is everything all right? Do you feel comfortable? Because she knows I have a tendency when out in public to just reach my limit and not say anything about it, because previously, for most of my life, not acknowledging that, it's just, I'm just uncomfortable. I am at my literal psychological limit of what I can take with being social.
And having to be tough about that, right? I think all of us have clearly learned tough about it.
There's also a beautiful side to this, though, right? Yeah, me and my husband have that to navigate. But yesterday we went to the mall, and he wears the t-shirt, like Hawaiian shirt button downs all the time. He needed some new ones. So we went to go get it. And so we spent like hours wandering through the mall, touching every shirt, because it's the pattern. And he would be like, Molly, I need you to come touch this. And I was like, ew, you will hate this. This is a terrible feel. Feeling this makes my mouth feel like, I don't know if that's a synesthesia thing. And that's the other thing, right? You realize once you have these understandings of yourself, are they diagnostic or symptomatic, right? Like, he's recently realized he has auditory processing issues, and like figuring that out changed his whole understanding of his communication, right? And then there's things like hyperlexia versus dyslexia.
Yeah, both in my family.
Like, I was reading at age 3. Like I was reading at age 3, and people were like, so their expectations of me in school were really high. And I was like, I'm not interested in this though. So I did really bad.
The spectrum is filled with gifted children, basically. Burned out gifted children. I mean, and I can definitely echo that with myself. I showed a lot of promise from a very young age for academic aptitude. So that just ended up piling a bunch of stuff on me, which of course overloaded me, and I became a C student. How can this student
be in gifted and talented class and also failing?
I know that too.
Yeah.
Right. And our parents
we don't understand.
Not able to advocate for us. But the cool side of that is I now am a parent, and my daughter has ADHD, and I get to be the fucking dopest advocate that I wish I had.
Yeah.
Right? Like, she knows I will go to bat for her. And I have about a lot of things, like these people have heard. But
one thing, not to be too tangential, but just to highlight the importance of people understanding their uniqueness. Can I use your husband as an example, Molly? Because I have his human design.
Yeah, no, I also want to make sure that you guys know I talked to him about it, and he's on the same page as I am. Like, there are these two different sides of consent, of talking about people, right? Where people either want deep privacy, I feel like, or on the other end of that, me and him are like, we are completely hard on our sleeve about it because we can be, and we're comfortable with it. So he's fine with us talking about him.
Okay. Well, so he three of his 4 channels in human design are individual. An individual has this slow, mutative, or evolutionary and deaf process. He can only hear what he's ready to hear. And so, like, you just have to allow for that space to happen, because when he shifts, it's like it's integral, right? He's integrating something that becomes
such a beautiful process.
So I'm going to jump in as the Vox Populus here for a second.
But J-Rob, that's exactly the point. What Jess said.
Yeah,
of
so
course.
I just want to respond to that, what that looks like on the outside to me, right? And that's another thing with neurodivergence. What does it look externally versus what does it look like internally? So externally, I feel like I'm shouting into the void as I'm trying to help him half the time. And I've thought about not doing that because I'm like, maybe I'm inhibiting his process. But then eventually he suddenly, like, it feels like there's no growth, no growth, no growth. I'm frustrated as hell. And then suddenly, all at once, he's like, whoa, like all of the things that I've said, he's like integrated and processed and becomes and embodies overnight. And I'm like, I need to remember this for the next time I'm frustrated because like, I don't want to keep repeating this.
In school, right? We're taught that
like I said, stepping in as the Vox Populus, human design is going to be something that is covered in a later episode because I gotta tag you. Please see future episodes. Callum is talking about something we have not yet discussed.
I think
on
we
this
did
show.
talk about human design.
So
I have a
if
quick
anyone is lost, we touch on it very briefly, but just in case anyone is listening, because we get involved in the shop talk sometimes and don't realize that many people listening don't know where we're coming from. So human design is something that's going to be talked about more in the modalities episode, just the same as the Gestalt theory that I mentioned. So as I said, just stepping in as the voice of the audience to let everyone know what that is.
It's got astrology vibes, but with a scientific makeup to it. Just to like make that's very brief, energetic.
It's a synthesis of Western astrology, the Kabbalah, the I Ching, and quantum physics.
So
right.
let's not get
Quantum
distracted
physics,
with talking about future episodes. So one of the things I wanted to touch on here at this conversation is stigma and the past stigma around that, because that's one of the big things with many neurodivergent people that make us act in an uncomfortable fashion. And there's been a lot of stigma. The whole reason I'm going to pull the Godwin's Law card for anyone that doesn't know what Godwin's Law is. It is the inevitable train of any conversation on a long enough path to bring up the Nazis. So we're going to do that now. So the reason that there's not a lot of...
What a great segue. Oh my goodness.
It's Godwin's Law. Just a casual bringing up of the Third Reich. But it's important because...
I have that book on my shelf.
There's a reason we don't have as much research as we should about neurodivergence. It's the same reason that we don't have as much information as we should on gender science. It's because the Nazis burned them. All of this research. And one of the things that we talked about before the show that is dark, but unfortunately needs to be brought up, is we've all heard the term Asperger's syndrome. And it needs to be mentioned where that comes from. And it was created by we'll say a German doctor in the 30s to identify, actually his name was Dr. Asperger, who actually did it. But he created this system to divide people who had autism into those who just needed to be put down and those who could work in a factory. And those who could work in a factory were given the title Asperger's because they were high functioning enough to work. And so Asperger's is one of those things that's really kind of fallen out of fashion because of that thing, because of the actual reality of the research. And it also has to be noted that this definition of what is neurodivergent changes constantly. It's fluid. Like Jess brought up, it was just autism when it first got brought up. Now it is a divergent spectrum of things. And there's a lot of stigma with neurodivergence, with autism and ADHD, that it's viewed that there's something wrong with you, that it's a disability, that it's something that should be fixed if it could. And speaking for myself,
That's important.
there was a lot of that social stigma to get over. This concept of, oh, I might be on the spectrum. Does that mean there's something wrong with me? And thinking that, and this isn't the case, this is just the thoughts that went through my head, thinking, does that mean that I'm not as smart as I thought I was? Does that mean I'm not as capable as I thought I was? Does that mean that everything I'm afraid about myself is true? And that's not what being on the spectrum means. It doesn't mean that you are less capable or less than. It does not necessarily mean you have any type of handicap. And in truth, and I hope someone out there listening finds some inspiration in this, what really changed my view of autism and of myself was viewing it as an advantage. That this isn't something wrong with me. This is an advantage that I have. You mean other people can't hyper focus on single tasks to the point that they don't even hear what's going on around them? Like, all of these different things that I thought made me unusual, but it just, I hate to be trite about it. Things that I thought made me weird were what actually made me special. And the talents that I had relied upon them. And so there was really a lot of personal growth with me of looking past that stigma and looking at what the reality of the situation is. Like, yeah, I'm not going to look someone in the eyes when talking to them. That's just the way of it. Like we were talking about this beforehand, we a couple of us discovered tricks to be able to look people in the eyes that just ended up being haunting as hell.
Like, without it being too much, like direct eye contact. But
yeah, let me stare into your soul.
It's also important to mention, right? Like, it does help when you're diagnosed, or even if you're not diagnosed or it's self-diagnosis, right? Like, it really does help to view it through the lens of like, oh my God, this is a superpower. But does that mean that it's easy?
Right.
No. Like, there's pros and cons to it. And it's difficult, but it's all just part of the process, right? Like, there's stigma still from other people.
There's not just the stigma.
It's
like,
reframing.
we don't want to talk
Right.
positivity ourselves or anyone else, right? Because
Yeah.
there are some
Absolutely.
aspects. So, like, we have to look at it, first of all, as not just one spectrum. It's like, can be broken down into symptoms or aspects or
Categories and ranges
within each person's individual condition or experience. So it's like, my executive functioning, it has its own spectrum. My sensory input has its own spectrum, or that could even be broken down. My auditory sensory spectrum, my visual sensory spectrum, my So
there's thousands
there's
of
a spectrum
intelligences,
for
right?
each
Exactly.
part of each person's individual neurology. And the more we can open that discussion and gain awareness around each person's, make it just normal to be able to be like, oh yeah, I experienced this. Where am I on
We're all different.
spectrum? Not one big spectrum that is just ridiculous. Like, that's where a lot of the misunderstanding about neurodivergence comes from. Autism isn't just one spectrum. It's multifaceted, and where you are in each part.
Yeah.
And
it
if
doesn't
you
mean one thing.
Yeah,
and ADHD is the same way.
Gain that awareness, break it down. Where am I struggling? Where am I like, ooh, I'm super, this one's my superpower on this spectrum. But like, I really struggle with time management. If we can learn to break those pieces down, then give ourselves permission to get support in those areas. And then, y'all, like, people support each other.
Accommodate each other.
Actually integrate.
Right. Fill each other's gaps.
And that's
Wait, what was that?
And that's the thing, because and this is unfortunate, and anyone that's listening that's not from America is probably not going to understand this, but it's real hard to get support, to get diagnosis even, to get care. And so we cannot rely upon the system to take care of those needs that we have. What we can do is be accommodating. What we can do is strive to understand the individuals around us and their needs.
We can step
just as the same as you would want someone to do for you.
We can step outside that system and create community together. Like this group that we have was like the biggest gift to all of us, I feel like, because it made, like, we are all exploring our own individuality and authenticity and sovereignty in ways that are like, I always saw myself as a very like proud ADHD advocate, right? I always tried to be my authentic self to make space for other people because I have the confidence and boldness and I don't really give a fuck enough to like be that person, right? So I was like, why not? But even within this group, right, I realized how many places I was making myself smaller to be less of a nuisance or whatever, right? And I've realized too, like touching back on that time management thing, right? And that spectrum of that even is like, there's multiple ways to deal with it, right? Like Jess, for example, is very big on organization and structure. Like she craves it and needs it. Whereas I literally couldn't do that to save my life.
And both are okay.
So
both
I've instead created my life.
What serves you?
Right. It's just about learning.
Yeah.
Right. It's about learning what works for you. And like, for me, none of that works for me unless I had a hyper focus on a certain type of planner for a while. But once that was gone, so now I focus on what I call deep presence, which is really like setting up my life with as little time obligation things as possible, and then being deeply present with what needs to be done to take care of myself, my home, my family, my environment, moment by moment, because I have no object permanence. So, and I see that, but I see that as a gift because for me, as what once was an issue, my time management, always being late to work, getting in trouble all the time, regardless of the accommodations, struggling to have time management and like just management of structure in general. So, and habits, like brushing my teeth even. I now just brush my teeth whenever I'm like, my teeth feel like they need to be brushed or whatever. And that's multiple times a day, but like it's when but I don't feel like obligation makes me defiant. I also probably would have been diagnosed with ODD had
they known. Yeah.
Assessed when I was younger. Right.
Yeah.
Because I definitely still have it.
What's ODD?
Oh, okay. So oppositional defiance disorder. My daughter also has that. Basically, it just means like you are incredibly defiant against everything, right? Like, and you have a big resistance against authority in particular. So basically, obligation and authority are our biggest adversary. Like, is that the right choice? I don't know. But either way, it's like our nemesis, right? So, which is why my deep presence works well for me, because I'm not doing it because I'm obligated. I'm doing it because I respect myself in my life and I have an awareness that I'm going to utilize. And the more I lean into that, like I'm working on teaching my kids that because I'm terrible with structure. And, you know, kids need structure.
Not every kid, though.
If you have a structure that's different, I do. My daughter doesn't. My son desperately does.
So this is a conversation of equality versus equity, I do feel.
No.
Because equality has an implication that we're treating everyone the same. And people don't deserve to be treated the same. People deserve to be treated as themselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's a big thing. That's the difference between this normal, we'll put that in big quotes, and this divergence. And it really, one of the things I always come back to, especially with looking at that definition of neurotypical, it sure sounds like neurotypical isn't the typical. And that in truth, especially with this expanding definition of what neurodivergent means, it's a safe thing to say that we're all neurodivergent, every person. And what does that really say? Ultimately, just by the syntax of the words. It just means everyone's different. Everyone in their mind, neurologically, is divergent.
And why
different.
wouldn't we be,
We
though?
all have. And why wouldn't we
Like,
be?
logic,
Everyone
neuroscience,
is a
everything
unique thing.
points at that.
Yeah. And how weird would that be to be? So neurotypical means you are a carbon copy. You think
Drone.
like this other set of people. You're a drone.
I feel like that's an
Why would
archaic
anyone want
system,
that?
right? To believe
It
that
is.
we can all neurologically be wired the same when we understand so fucking little about the brain in the first place, right?
Yeah.
But like if they do brain scans, they realize like there are commonalities, right? But
Mhm.
there's no way that all of our, well, on top of it with conditioning and all of that involved, it's so complexly obvious that it's whatever type of chaos theory is involved, right? There's no way that we're not like,
No.
it's like all different. And there are people that might have things
Yeah.
more in common than other people, but that's because there's so many variations in so many people. It's a fluke. It's not.
And it really has to be emphasized. And Molly and I have had this conversation one-on-one before, that neurodivergence is necessary in society, just as the same as neurotypical. Because in society, in civilization, you need the people who can 9 to 5 it, who can do the same thing. Those that stick by the fire.
The hunter-gatherer
And at the same
part.
time,
Remember?
yeah, you need the people who are just wild enough to go build a bridge
The idea
across a massive
people.
span,
Right.
or build this giant statue. Like,
Or to be
The idea
aware
of
of the
people.
threat that nobody else realized existed because it's a new
And the
threat.
people who are willing to push
yeah,
the status
exactly.
quo
And these things
to
are required.
further the greater good.
Yeah. To make progress.
Because they
Yeah,
can't help
exactly.
it.
They just naturally do it.
And that's the thing that I really want.
Oh,
I really want people to realize, listening to this, it's one of those things that really helped my own acceptance of myself and others. And that's, human history is built by the neurodivergent. It is quite literally paved by the neurodivergent. Those that had the ideas for something as strange as roads or an aqueduct, this incredibly lateral thinking that was outside of the norm. That's how we innovate.
Like, we went to the moon.
If it was just
and there's no
yeah,
way
we went to the
NASA would
damn
even be a
moon.
fucking thing. I mean, I know there's a lot of people now that debate
Oh,
that,
no.
but whatever. I'm not getting into that. But the point is like, all the things that people who believe that they're neurotypical enjoy, right? All the technology, like there is, I've heard that, I'm not sure if this was proven or not, but Steve Jobs, like all of these people are neurodivergent. You wouldn't have all of your like internet access and all of that. You wouldn't have any of the
We would
luxuries
still
in your
just
life
be
without the
hunter-gatherers.
neurodivergent people that
Okay,
are
yes,
being shamed and stigmatized.
What about
Yeah.
the
You're
poets,
welcome.
if it was just
artists.
neurotypical.
the healers?
Sure. Yeah. Poets, artists,
Mark
all of
Twain,
these things.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I went to the museum
Yeah.
not too long ago,
100%.
reading all of that stuff. He was so beyond his years. He was radical as hell.
I mean, it's appropriate that we talk about him, but Nikola Tesla,
Happy
if
birthday.
anyone that has looked into who that man was personally, like not professionally, that man was neurodivergent.
I mean,
as
either
hell.
way, there's not a
And-
single neurotypical
Either
bone in his body.
no, and he was. Even today, we are using his discoveries and his all of his findings to further the progress of society. And I could go on a huge long rant about Tesla and Edison and all of that stuff, but I won't. That's something for another time.
so
Go ahead.
I think what everyone's saying here is, there's a need to recognize the advantage
Yes.
of diversity.
Yes, absolutely. And accept it in yourself. That's the important thing. And that's really what we are trying to emphasize here is, yes, it is the acknowledgement.
Because it's actually
Go ahead.
it's a functional therapy.
Yeah. Absolutely.
If you can recognize the diversity in yourself, then you're capable of recognizing the diversity within
I think
others.
a lot
Absolutely.
of it
And
goes back to, and I think a lot of life in general, like a love for life, goes back to creating a sustainable sense of healthy curiosity and enthusiastic curiosity, right? About yourself and others. Because like
Yes,
I'm
ma'am.
endlessly fascinated with getting to know people. It's one of my
And we also
favorite
accept
things
the
ever.
people who are just
And
inly
it's like
fascinated with their own selves, and they are welcome here too.
Right. No, I'm saying like I'm absolutely fascinated with how people function. That's like
I
one of
love
my
you,
favorite
Molly
things. But like I want them to be
That's
fascinated
pretty
about themselves too. Right? Because that's how I learned how to love myself, was to just be like endlessly fascinated and excited about it. You know, and a little detached maybe at first if you need to be.
So that's a really important topic too, right? Because sometimes I think, especially in this modern world, we're kind of concretizing our identity.
Branding.
I am this. And, you know, human design will tell us that 60% of people don't have a defined identity process. So they're variable in their identity structure, or they're meant to be. And then not self-conditioning for them, right? Them trying to conform to the conditioning of the society.
Well, they can
is to
absolutely
have a
have an I
uniform
am statement
identity.
that is expansive. I am open to many different expressions of myself and exploring who I am in different environments and how I feel around different people as an expression of myself.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's been a big one for me recently.
And that's what I talk to with clients a lot, is that understanding and acceptance of self. Because when you understand and accept who you are, it becomes easier to understand and accept others in that process. And there's an interesting idea of positive selfishness. It's a CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy principle. And it basically says that before you can be present for others, you have to take care of yourself first. You have, and it's not a negative. It is something you need to do. You cannot be there for other people until you've given yourself that acknowledgement, that care, that understanding. Because how can you possibly give that to somebody else?
You can
if
to
you've
a
not
point,
given
but
that to yourself.
you push to the point of burnout.
And if
it's not
and
sustainable.
Receptivity.
Yeah,
you take that too far, you become a martyr. And you sacrifice all for others.
You have to be receptive of your own needs in order to be able to be receptive of other people's.
Learning how to do that, right?
You know?
A lot of people have
Yes,
ruptures
100%.
in their childhood development where they skipped learning certain foundational self-care steps, right? That's really common in our society where we aren't raised by a village anymore, and where often we have caregivers or parents who don't have all the tools or who are stretched too thin, and then there's gaps.
And carrying their own child. It's just like that generational trauma piece, right? Where your parents are raising you with the tools that they were given, which were insufficient to raise them in the first place. And then that just getting carried down. If we don't get curious, we don't explore, we don't learn from each other about ourselves and each other.
And then
how
you
can
add
we teach our
in
kids to?
neurodivergence, and if they had no awareness or understanding of their own neurodivergence, or if you yourself don't, and then you're trying to parent in a neurotypical way, or, you know, with limited tools and support, even for a neurotypical, but then you have these additional differences and no support in your environment. Come on. But we have this great opportunity to expand
it's exactly that you have to.
Yeah, expand what support looks like.
It's about getting curious about
environments
yourself.
can look like. How can we design environments to be supportive?
Right.
Let's
Yes.
get some
Yes.
neurodivergent
Huge.
people on
And-
that. Come on. Like, let's redesign our
Right.
environment
Yeah.
to be
Absolutely.
accommodating to a spectrum of experiences.
And it's really about what works for you, right? What serves you and what doesn't, regardless of diagnosis, regardless of any of that. What serves you and what doesn't, and really deeply
Without
curious
judgment.
about questioning everything. Like, just, right, with a little bit of detachment, so you can look at it without the emotional struggle with it.
But
right?
then we got
Without
to
the
talk
feelings
about
of guilt and
how
shame,
necessary
right?
it is to
Like-
learn to process your emotions, that emotions are welcome, right?
Right. Zoom out and then zoom back in and be like, now that I have the logical thing that serves me and makes sense, let me process the emotions around that that are limiting me from that. Right? Like, let me process that guilt and shame I have. Like, for example, my mom was basically like living and growing up with Martha Stewart. Okay. I'm not kidding. Like, a doily wasn't out of place in my house. And then there is me, the fucking chaos machine, right? And she would just literally she would just like be so frustrated, and she wouldn't teach me how to clean because it was so hard for her because I was so different. So she would just bag things up and throw them out because she couldn't deal with it anymore. So then fast forward to me being an adult, right? And she's not around anymore to like now help me now that I know how to explain myself. So I had to unwind all of that and figure out how to like, oh my God, I forgot to do my dishes for like 3 days in a row. It didn't even occur to me because I wasn't living in deep presence at that point with myself, which is what works and serves me. I was trying to do it on a schedule, right? But I don't have a sense of time that works for a schedule like that, you know? And it's just this whole unwinding
And that really,
process.
and that's one of the things we were talking about is this unwinding of conditioning. And be it conditioning that you were given by society, conditioning that you were raised with. One of the big problems that came with myself was my mother who raised me taught me to believe that mental illness was a weakness and that there wasn't really such a thing as neurodivergence. It was just people wanting attention. And that was drilled into my head for years and years and years and years. And I can't tell you how many times I've been told, like Molly was talking about with the cleaning, I shouldn't have to explain that to you. That's something you should just know. Okay, well, I don't. So an ounce of context would be
Are we
great.
going to deal?
Yeah.
Are we going to deal with the reality of the human being, or are
Normalizing
we going to
meeting
avoid
people
it and
where
say
they
you should
are.
be different than you actually are?
Exactly.
It's an avoidance.
Yes. And that's something that I never had. And I suffered for it. I suffered for it for a very long time. And it's something that I've since gotten past, that it's that tacit acknowledgement of a mental illness or something that makes you different is not a negative. It is something to be embraced.
How much mental illness, and I say this from my personal experience and lens, right? How much of it has to do with us suffocating ourselves? Because like I had anxiety and depression so bad when I was younger, up until the past few years even. And like the more I lean into my authenticity, the more I surround myself with people that embrace my authenticity back, right? I don't even, anxiety is not even a thing I remember having now. You know, I mean,
yeah, same.
So this is a really important aspect that we're coming to here because it's like trauma that's happened through relationship needs to be healed relationally. Relational trauma is healed relationally. And so how do we have a sacred partnership with people in our life that co-facilitates
learning to co-regulate
our
with
healing,
people,
our
to heal the
evolvement,
nervous
right?
system, and learn
It
how to be in a
contributes
new
to that
pattern.
understanding. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's one of the speaking for myself, I don't know about everyone else, but that's one of the things I love so much about doing the work that we do, being a hypnotherapist, is we have to understand other people. We have to get into other people's heads metaphorically and kind of step out of ourselves in the process. And it's fascinating to me because I've said a few times, the biggest secret is my clients help me as much as I help them by voicing, by having that understanding, by seeing the different people that I work with that defy my own judgments. I can't tell you how many times I've worked with somebody and been like, oh, this person is going to be this. This person is going to be like this. My own presumptions. And then within 10 minutes of talking to them one-on-one as a client, as a person, I was wrong. I was completely wrong.
The growth that they're capable of. It's when you make space for it.
Yes. Exactly.
Like people endlessly surprise me, right? Even within this own group, being able to be a observer in everybody's growth has just really floored me. Like they're the same person authentically, but different, you know? Like they're them, but they're like more like the most delicious, yummiest version of them, right? It's
really
like they're improving.
More life coming through.
Yeah. And that's really what it is, living more, being more alive. And I could really understand that because, like I've said before, I was a very angry, negative person most of my life and did not experience much of anything because of that. All I experienced was that negativity because that is the lens that I chose to view the world through. And changing that lens changed the way I viewed the world, changed my outlook. And part of changing that lens, part of choosing that lens was an acceptance of things about myself, of acknowledging the time management that I needed, of my social limitations, of my strengths. And realistically,
healing with your mob boss past.
Dealing with,
I know it's
Callum's convinced I'm a mob boss.
He's retired now.
Ja ne poнимаю, что ты говоришь.
You know, it's funny, right? It's a funny, but it's also serious, right? Because I think a lot of people need to live or learn that they need to live this hardened way of being, right? Like kill or be killed mentality. I think a lot of like so. Let's talk about it in the extreme, right? Like because then we can integrate the full spectrum. So what happens when somebody's so distrustful and so spiteful in the way they believe the reality is that they don't allow for any opportunity to actually have intimate, genuine connection with anybody else. And it's like, I better fuck them over. I better
but it's
do
the
them
self-fulfilling prophecy,
before they do
right?
it to me.
Because when you look at the world through a different lens, you're also saying, oh my God, the world is beautiful. There's all these amazing people and everybody's adorable and I love them, right? Then you meet the good in people.
And
absolutely.
There
or
has
you
to
can
be
do the
a
opposite.
place for a person to begin to explore that, though. If someone has never experienced safety in their upbringing or their environment, then that requires a lot of support and facilitation and
that's
time to create that safety for that person to begin to explore that, to begin to even know that it is an option to have that lens.
But to find that safety too, when the safety isn't creating itself for you, is also a choice, right? That whole setting yourself on fire and putting yourself back out thing, right? Where it's like, sometimes you have, like, I feel like I kind of had to do that, where I had to be like, I need to like be brave because I'm not finding the safety in my life, and I know it exists.
But we also have to acknowledge, privilege in this, because
that's hard.
There are some things that are in our control, and there are some things that are outside of our control. And yes, we have the ability to choose how we react and view those things, but still, if bullets are flying, right? We have to consider, environments outside of our control and how we navigate and help people.
My intention was more to say your life might be really hard right now, but I don't want you to feel completely helpless all the time, right? Like I want to give, that was my whole intention. It wasn't to discredit the experiences that are difficult. It was to say, hey, like wiggle around a little bit if you're done with it, right? If you feel like you can't take another drop of this insanity, see where you can wiggle a little bit, right? Like where is the loose, where the rope tied around your back has a weakness and a looseness, and how can you start the wiggle?
So that's exactly the point, right? Are we allowing ourselves to be victims, or are we empowering ourselves for better? Doesn't mean shit isn't messed up. Yeah. Doesn't mean life isn't horrible sometimes.
Absolutely.
But it does mean you can choose in every moment for yourself, and you can grow the options of your choice. And the best way to do that is to get curious, to get adaptable, instead of frozen into trauma.
To find what you have control over, because there is always something within your control. And I'm a big fan of Stoic philosophy. And one of the things that Marcus Aurelius says is, do not worry about things outside of your control, because you cannot affect them. You cannot do anything about that. And if you cannot do anything, it's a helplessness. And there are few things to human psychology more toxic than helplessness. So rather than accept that helplessness, find what you have control over. Even if it's a small control you can exert, find that foothold and find that control that you can exert.
And I feel like we do also live in a society that curates helplessness. Like it's learned helplessness so that you're dependent on the system, so you don't become like the virus in the system, right? Like they don't want a Morpheus up in here. They want you to just keep being that cog in the machine. So,
and it really has to be emphasized how much societal expectation is put on every one of us. And it doesn't matter where you're listening from, America, India, Russia, wherever have you. There is an expectation, a series of expectations put upon you by the society around you, good, bad, or indifferent. And realizing those acknowledgments, actually giving voice, or acknowledging those expectations, giving voice to them, really helps you understand where you are, how you feel about it. And just because it's a societal expectation doesn't necessarily mean that you have to fall in line with it. If it's something that you cannot do, you cannot do it. I can't work a 9 to 5. I can't do that. It's something I have figured out about myself long ago. And I'm not lazy. I don't not want to work. I can't work that schedule. I would rather work 3 days a week for 20 hours a day than do the 9 to 5. I am capable of producing a true quality of work, as long as I don't adhere to those societal expectations of what that work should look like. And whatever it may be, is it your professional life? Is it your fashion? Is it your gender? Whatever it may be, are you categorizing yourself by your own needs or by society's needs? Do you feel obligated to go work a 9 to 5 because you need that to be happy? Or do you feel obligated to go work a 9 to 5 because that's what's expected of you? That's what society considers normal and respectable. And
we have to meet our basic needs first, though, before we can go exploring all those things. So sometimes we have to figure that out and start supporting each other and changing the fucking system. True. So that it does support people at every level, at the basic survival need level. There is neurodivergence. There is, there's so much need for support and understanding to help people get out of that basic, just meeting their survival needs. Because think about it. Think about if you are neurodivergent in ways that are challenging in our normal workforce, in our society, it's going to be even harder for you to get to the level of, now I even have time to think about who I am. Now I even have time to explore and get curious about, do I love myself, accept myself, and can I get help? If society isn't giving you access to the support you need in areas that are extra challenging to you because of your neurodivergence to even survive, come on. Right.
Well, and you're in a constant state of burnout, right? Like, I spent years in a constant state of burnout, just being like, I know this isn't working, but I don't know what the next move to make is, right? And how many people with neurodivergence have to deal with eviction, have to deal with like nutritional deficiencies because like they have sensory with eating, but also they don't have access to the supplements or vitamins they need because they're fucking expensive, right? Or medication and insurance to get the healthcare they need. Like all of those things.
Right.
Let alone the time.
Yeah. And that is the unfortunate aspect. Like what I talked about, how living in this country, we don't have access to the care we need. And so like, could I go to a doctor and be diagnosed with autism? Yeah, probably. What would that do? What would that do for me? Does that get me any support? Does that get me any resources that could help improve my life? No. If anything, it just gets me a black mark on my medical record to be perceived by the powers that be.
In some situations, you may, depending on where you live and what supports are available in your community, you might actually gain access to career coaches that can help you, and their connections to organizations and companies who are more accepting and accommodating to differences, and see, oh, wow, you're really good at this thing. Let me move you to this position, and let's, have understanding in the workplace.
But at the same time, I'm from a part of the country that mark on your record simply just means that you are handicapped. You are disabled. That is all that means. You don't get resources really to help you. You don't get counseling. You get a mark on your record, maybe a check. And that's about it. And that's part of that systemic change that needs to happen. And unfortunately, that change will not happen in the system itself. That change will not happen
demand it, right? Unless
from the top down.
The social proof is an expectation of it. It's like, that's how things change.
Yeah. But we have social proof of a lot that is not the norm. But if with that in mind, like I've kind of touched on before, if there's no help to be had from the system,
inconsistent. It's not
Uncle
the
Sam
same
is an absent
board.
father, it's
So it's looking into your area
absolutely. And that's part of the problem.
Needs and figuring out how they line up.
And getting the support system you need. Exactly. And if that support system is the system, great. If that support system is your friends who provide you that understanding, that is just as valid. But it's important that we support each other. That's kind of the point I was getting to. If the system won't do it, we have to.
And if right now your version of a support system is listening to this fucking podcast, right? Yes. And that's a step in the right direction, because that's where it all really starts, right? Is access to information, and like the sigh of relief of being like, oh my God, okay, I am relatable. Like, this is relatable.
You're not alone.
When nothing has been before.
And that's the big thing. You're not alone. You're not unusual. You're not weird.
Or you
you're
are,
not lost.
if those are positive and endearing terms. Like, I
love
think weirdos. But okay.
Yeah,
I am a weirdo.
I think weird's good. Like,
it's funny because my daughter will use weird as a term of endearment, but there are or strange, but there are so many kids who are taught because of their conditioning that that's bad. So she'll be like, you weirdo. And they'll be like, what the fuck? Like, offended. And she's like, no, that means I like you. Like,
that's a good thing.
I also think this is a great point to talk about rejection sensitivity dysphoria. And I know I've wanted to talk about that. And I feel like this is a great moment. Are we feeling it? Okay.
Please do,
it has
Molli.
come to my attention recently that people don't know what this is. And that when you learn what this is, it fucking changes your life, okay? So, I feel rejected. No, I'm just kidding. But, so, basically, rejection, sensitivity, dysphoria, just to break it down, right? It's that feeling when you feel inadequate, basically, socially, right? And the dysphoria part of it, right? Like, so it's feeling rejected. But, and so I'm pregnant right now and my hormones are crazy and my symptoms are much stronger when I'm hormonal. Okay. For example. And so for me, it's been even more prominent than it's ever been, even though I'm aware of it. So like, I'll be with my closest friends that I like know logically love me being there. They accept me for who I am, and that sometimes I don't make sense, and that sometimes I'm all over the place, and sometimes whatever. But like, for some reason, I feel like I want to withdraw because I'm feeling like I am being obnoxious. I feel like maybe they're trying to replace me, or maybe they're just hanging out with me out of obligation, right? All of these things that if you actually took action on them would alienate the shit out of you. And lots of people who aren't aware of this, they're not aware that it's their own brain tricking them with a perception to try to protect them. That, like, so the thing that helps me the most is I just name it. I'm like, guys, I am feeling like I'm being wicked annoying. Like, I know y'all love me. And they're like, I didn't notice anything was different. Like, we invited you to be here specifically. I actually begged you to come. And like, but so there's still that little part of me that's like, they're just saying that to make me feel better. And that's the dysphoria of it, right? And it's just like, but understanding the reality of it versus like logically versus emotionally. Sometimes you're just going to feel that way, but it doesn't mean you always need to take action based on it. You know, and it's, and the more you're aware of that and look into your life and be like, oh, where could this be affecting me? Right? Like, you may be alienating yourself on accident as a form of like self-preservation from the community that could break you free. It could be literally right in front of you and you're protecting yourself from it by withdrawing and cocooning, which I used to do all the time. I would have like a month long, like I would get agoraphobia actually. Like really bad. And to the point that I had an anxiety dog, like that I would, so that I would have to go outside in my yard. So the dog would go to the bathroom and it would get me out of my house and help break that cycle. That's how bad it used to be. But now I'll be like, guys, I feel like I need to withdraw. And 10 minutes later, I forgot. So it's about that awareness and applying it and looking at it in your life, identifying it and naming it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then it starts to soften, right? Not forever, not always.
But at least you're not
it
thinking,
becomes manageable. And then
I'm pathetic. There's something seriously wrong with me. Like, I'm not, you know, I'm just not tough enough. Yes, exactly. Or thinking it's only you.
A
like
limiting story that you can't actually
when Molly
live your
taught
life.
me
It's
this
the
was a
acknowledgement
thing,
of that need.
my mind was blown and I was like, oh, I make so much more sense to myself now. And I've been able to share it with other people who it has dramatically changed their lives to have the language around it. And like she said, once you can see, oh, this is what's happening, then you aren't so reactive to it in a limiting way.
I also think it's really important.
I'm sorry.
When there's a
Molly, I cut
mystery
you off.
to it, when you don't know, it's difficult. No, all I was saying is when
No,
there's a
you're
mystery
good.
to
You
this
were a
thing,
wonderful addition.
when it's unnamed, when it's unnamed, it has power because it's just this anomalous force.
It
this,
has
this
control
desire,
over
this
you
thought, this whatever
when you
have
don't, when you can't hold it in your hand and figure out who it is and what it is and how it is. It's that curiosity of exploring the subconscious behaviors, like they're physical, inanimate objects. That's how I think of it sometimes, right? Like all the dimensions and angles. And I also think it's super helpful now that I understand myself to that point to make space for other people. And I clarify. Sometimes I am over communicative, but more often than not, I think it's helpful when I'll be like, hey, I see you're doing a thing that seems like it doesn't need to happen because I am fine with it and you're amazing and I'm really enjoying our time together, right? Like, I see you're not in alignment and I want to make space for that because I love when you're in alignment. Your authentic self is incredible to me and I would love to get to know it, right?
Thank you, Molly, because I feel like that's the topic essentially of alchemy. So are we able to transmute our present state of reality? Am I able to go from a triggered place and then come back to this reality and meet all of you guys here in the here and now? Can we actually be deeply present with each other?
Absolutely. Right? And knowing that that's part of life sometimes too. Like sometimes I'm in a fog because of my whatever is going on. And being able to name that and be like, guys, I'm feeling foggy today, typically softens it. Yeah. Doesn't always, and that's okay too. Because I know there's a light at the end of the tunnel.
There's seasons
I won't always feel foggy. This is a current state.
And it and that communication enables the people around you to also make space for that. And so then we, by communicating,
who are you? What are
hey,
you?
where
How
are you? Hey, I am here.
And it's so human. How human of us
we're tripping over
to
each
not
other
be
less.
on
We're
all
actually
the
in
time.
harmony more.
How human. I
And
find
that's
that
making
so
space
helpful.
for
I
the
learned
world.
that recently.
Yes.
Like, no matter what it is you're experiencing.
How human.
How human.
First of all, say to yourself, how human of me. And to share it with others. How human of you to be feeling this way right now, whatever it is.
Yep. It's
Whatever
all part
it
of the
is.
human condition.
Even if it's not typical by our society.
I can't tell you how many times I've been asked the question by a client, like, what does this mean? What does X mean in me? And my standard response to that is, you're human. Like, why do I feel this way? You're human.
And how
why do I
human
think
of
this
you
way?
for being weird.
Oh, I would have said it. You're fucking
You're weird as shit, man.
And I like
and that's the other thing, right? Something that I also learned, because I have mentioned, right? Like, I'm very outspoken and confident, and I typically deal with rejection, like, pretty well, right? But because of that, I don't get a lot of rejection because people are like, whoa. I don't know if it's like a hypnotic response. Right. I don't know. It's not always positive, but I just keep derping around in my world and it's very comfortable to do this. But the thing is like, I sometimes will throw myself under the bus, is what I call it. And you'll see me, I've already done it in both of these podcasts, all the podcasts we've done, and I'll continue doing it, where I will wear my own experiences and heart on my sleeve and be very, like, loudly vulnerable in a safe space, right? I'm not just shouting it to social media, but, like, this is the right space for it still. And so I'll say, hey, this is what I'm fucking struggling with. And that may be uncomfortable and vulnerable to a point, but it also makes space for other people to be like, oh, I can be, there's space for me to say something about this too. Like, more often than not, I get a, yeah, me too. Like, more often than not.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I'm usually not the person to speak anything about myself, but I've come to realize, doing what we do, being a hypnotherapist, that it is almost a necessity at that point to have that vulnerability, to expose, I was going to say to expose yourself to others, but don't
metaphorically,
do that. To leave yourself not that kind of exposure, but to show that vulnerability. That vulnerability is part of that therapy, of showing people that, look, I feel this way. I understand this. And if I do, it's a shared experience. Because so many times, be it neurodiversity, be it social, be it whatever, we don't have the perspective that what we are going
alone.
through is a shared experience. We think we're alone. We think that no one else thinks or experiences like this. And when you learn that it's not that case,
or also the lines for that identification, you know, aren't clear. You know, like, is it safe to allow myself to really be me here?
Or do I have the words
Am I going
to
to fit in
explain
enough to actually be accepted?
Right?
Absolutely.
Or
the
the
language
vice
to
versa.
explain it?
Mm-hmm.
Or
lacking the language was
or
a big
am I
thing.
judging somebody else for something that I see in myself?
And that's the difficult one.
I guess all I'm saying here is it's so complicated, right? It can be so multi-layered to actually dive into your traumas and your triggers, and to actually heal, and to be like, oh my God, I'm in a triggered state. I mean, like, I've been triggered multiple times in this podcast, but to actually pause and sort that out of myself, and then come from a place that's a loving part of my personality instead of a triggered part of my personality. Like, that's the deep work. Relational trauma is healed relationally.
And that's a good point to kind of tie a bow on everything as we kind of conclude this talk. Is it's fucking complicated. We talk about these issues of neurodivergence, and it's an intensely complex discussion. Nothing we have talked about today even touches the very tip of the discussions that need to be had. But it is, as said, incredibly complicated. There is no simple answer. There is no universal answer. But lacking answers, there needs to be discussion. And that's part of the reason, or that's all of the reason, really, that we chose to really lead this podcast with this topic. Yes, the last episode was introductions and all that. That doesn't really count.
I'd say all count.
This is the first real topic. And we...
J-Rob, I'm going to speak for myself and say I definitely count. And I know that Jess Francis and Molly Lou and J-Rob
Joke's
Parker
on you. I edited you out.
Wonderful people do that.
But you know what I mean. But it's... all of these things we're talking about are intensely complex and not an easy conversation for some people. And that is the thing that we are trying to address. The fact that it isn't an easy conversation for everybody, but it needs to be a conversation that we have with each other, as a society, about a society, wherever you want to put it. The fact of the matter is, neurodivergence is not just a thing, but it is a normal aspect of humanity. And that really has to be acknowledged. There is nothing wrong. There is nothing unusual. There is nothing that needs to be fixed. That neurodivergence, autism, ADHD, whatever you want to put under that umbrella, is not a disease to be treated. It is aspects of humanity. And that is what needs to be acknowledged, that because we're different, we are not less than. Because we have different needs, that doesn't make us less than. Everyone has different needs. Like we talked about earlier, neurodivergence can easily just be considered everyone on Earth, because all that is saying by that word is that we are all different in our head. And since we are all different in our head, we all have individual needs. And that if you acknowledge a human, a person as an individual, part of that individuality isn't just their interests and hobbies and voice and appearance. It is their neurology. It is their mind,
their nuances,
processing. That if you truly believe their nuances, that our individuality doesn't stop at our mode of dress. It doesn't stop at our personality. It goes all the way to our processing, our thinking, our needs, and that all neurodivergence is an extended acknowledgement of that individuality of humanity, that we all do not fit into a specific mold. And if we all don't fit into a specific mold,
as well as a discussion on how do we actually move forward from a place of recognizing about ourselves and actually tooling our lives to deeply serve us. And the reality, and what I really like that message of unity in there, J-Rob, because there is at some level a continually shared experience, and yet your experience is also deeply individual. It's both. It's relative and absolute in the universe out here. And so again, I would actually really like to toss it up to Molli and Jes, because I feel like you two bring a level of can bring a level of synthesis about how do we actually endeavor on the work. Because I don't just want to leave people without meaningful tools to actually begin moving forward. So I'd like to toss it up to you guys in particular, because I think for me, there's a quality to that.
What I recommend is the best place to start. I mean, so I primarily work with neurodivergent people. So I've, not only in my life, but in my work, I've seen a lot of it. And there isn't a whole lot of training out there that without experience that makes that easy, right? So the thing that I found that's fluid and functional for everybody with all of our nuances and differences is slowing down as much as you can to look at all of the things that you're doing whenever possible, even if it's just one action a day, and say, why did I do that? Was that intentional or was that reactional? And if it was reactional, really sit with it, observe the repetition in that similar behavior. It may look different. Just focus on one to start. Find that awareness, find where it repeats, figure out why. And that may take days, weeks, months, especially with your first one, right? But to really get curious about how that impacts your life, how that impacts your relationships, because without understanding these nuances in yourself, without understanding these nuances in others, how deep can your connection and relationships really go? And is that how deep you want them to go?
Absolutely. Self-awareness. That's really the self-awareness, self-examination. Jess, do you have anything that you'd like to add before we wrap up this episode?
If this is a safe space, or if I can share all of me. Brene Brown's marble jar method is really helpful with learning how to step by step incrementally test out how safe is this person or this environment, and building trust with yourself in that way, and building trust with other people in that way, incrementally, little by little. And and let's just keep creating more safety for each other by meeting each other where we are, acknowledging that we probably all have, I know I do, blind spots in our perceptions of other people's experiences, because we really only ever experience our own, right? So if we can give each other and ourselves more grace for those blind spots and openness to learn about each other, that curiosity that everyone keeps talking about, that we really can expand so much, solve so many of these problems if we keep that space open and safe for the discussions to happen in a world right now where, that's just not as common. There's so much fighting going on and bickering about these things. We can strive to create more safe spaces and conversations that can be productive by understanding one another, and all these nuanced layers of every spectrum, right? And if we can do that with our clients, and we can do that with ourselves, that awareness,
absolutely,
and then meeting people where they are and finding, the tools are going to be different for everyone. Everything has to be like a holistic approach for each different person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all individual. Yeah. Holistic and individual. Yeah, exactly.
And there's a kind of strength in compassion with that.
Absolutely.
Right?
And it's
There's a strength in the compassionate
like
staying with yourself regardless of whatever the heck is going on.
No,
That's the thing. It's a thing that has to be learned.
to throw myself under the bus again, right? I, during this whole thing, have been like, wow, I'm impulsive and hyperactive today. I am accidentally talking over people. I am talking a lot. And I'm aware of all of that, right? But so I'm trying to also soften enough to be respectful of the people I care about in this group, because they have a lot of wonderful things to say. But also not shaming myself. It's about self-love and accountability. It's where they meet. That's where growth happens.
I have to say, I felt like I was
have it
doing
without
the same thing.
both.
So you're not alone.
Absolutely.
And that's the practice.
100%.
We're passionate.
We're all excited to be here and talk about
I know I interrupt. And
Y'all are
we all
fine.
have so much value.
Lock me up.
I respect all of you.
Oh, it's fine. That's
But I would have
all
never
part of the
known
fun.
that everybody else felt
all
like
right.
that today.
Well,
I thought that it was so obvious. Just to talk about that rejection sensitivity dysphoria, I thought it was so painfully obvious that I was the rudest, loudest, most excessive person in this room.
Right.
But see, that's a perfect example. I just named it.
comment below. Let
And I
everyone know what you
still
think.
might have been. But I still might have been in the
who's the worst?
because I'm doing
You
my
let us
best.
know.
I'm identifying it. I'm naming it. When I named it, I made space for other people to admit they felt that way. Like, that's an example in real life that I didn't expect to happen when I did that.
Absolutely.
But it's like always more amazing than I think.
Absolutely.
Yes, and that's strong
So
and compassion.
I would like to thank everybody for tuning in today. Otherwise, we're just going to keep talking and make this a 3-hour episode. So, but thank you everyone for tuning in, for listening. And again, if you ever have any questions about anything that we've said, if you have any questions for any of us individually, whatever have you, if you just want to relate a story, whatever reason you want to write us, please feel free. And again, that email address is HypnoDivergence, just like the podcast name, at gmail.com. It has been a pleasure talking with you guys as usual. And otherwise, thank you very much once more, everyone, for joining us. And we will see you next time.